There have been so many live-action superhero TV shows over the years. Here's my list of what I believe are the best superhero TV shows of all time. Spoilers ahead, and with that all out of the way.
Come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Take a look and you'll see into your imagination.
Honorable mentions go to Peacemaker, Superman and Lois, and The Boys. The reason why Peacemaker isn't on my list is because I'm not sure if this was a one-hit wonder or will this series stay consistent throughout its entire run. But the first season of Peacemaker is freaking amazing. Superman and Lois is only on season 3, and knowing DC shows on the CW, around the season 3 to 4 mark of a DC CW superhero show is when the show hits a rough patch and becomes bad. There's two paths Superman and Lois could take after this rough patch. Superman and Lois could take the path of Arrow and bounce back, then proceed to have more good seasons than bad seasons overall, or it can go down the path of the Flash, where it doubles down on everything that's wrong with its bad seasons and ends up having more bad seasons than good. I'm hoping for the best when it comes to Superman and Lois, but I really like the first 2 seasons, and it has the potential to be one of my favorite superhero shows of all time. The Boys I haven't watched enough of to put on my list. I think this show is on season 3 right now, and I am still on the first season, but it's been so long since I watched the little I did see from the first season was on, so when I do get back to the series, I would start it all over from the beginning. I will get back to The Boys eventually, but from what I remember watching of The Boys, I did really enjoy the show. Coming in number 10, The Runaways. The Runaways is a teen drama superhero show that is set in the MCU, and unfortunately almost no one talks about this show. It might be because this show is in a genre that many superhero fans do not like too much, but I do enjoy the teen drama genre sometimes. This is one of the instances where I do enjoy a teen drama. I think it's because I was around the same age as the characters of The Runaways when the show was airing, so I connected to the characters a bit more. But also the story was very interesting and it was addicting to watch. Like after every episode I wanted to see what happens next, whether the episode was amazing or not. You also had Josh Schwartz as the showrunner on this series, who is the king of doing teen dramas and other dramas in general too. Josh Schwartz worked on iconic teen shows like The OC, Gossip Girl, and Dynasty. I kind of like The OC, not gonna lie. It's like a guilty pleasure show for me, and I did enjoy the first season of that show. Gossip Girl and Dynasty, on the other hand, not so much. But they are iconic shows for that genre. Josh Schwartz also was behind 2 of some of my favorite all-time TV shows in Chuck and Looking for Alaska. I felt his presence behind this series, and somehow he's always able to make shows that kind of get you hooked. Plus, his shows always have some great music, and all of the Josh Schwartz things that makes a Josh Schwartz TV show is in this series. The story about a group of kids that try to take down their villainous parents with many twists and turns, plus the teen drama aspect, makes for a series that I like a lot, and is definitely one of the more unique superhero shows that deserves more love. Coming in number 9, Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones was a TV series that was part of the Netflix MCU shows that dealt with street-level things in the MCU. So I really liked the first season of this series, and Kilgrave was a great villain. Kilgrave is still one of the best villains in all of the MCU in my opinion. After that, I enjoyed the second season, then the third season was just okay in my opinion. The tone of this series was very different from any superhero series we have gotten before by dealing with some really serious issues and mature themes, so I really appreciated this series for that. This show did get worse over time, but I still think the show is pretty good overall with some great moments throughout all 3 seasons, and the directing throughout this series was great too. Coming in number 8, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was MCU's first TV show, and they kicked off their shows to a good start with this series. This show lasted for 7 seasons, and it was mostly consistent. I felt this show kinda had some low points at times, but was always able to bounce back. It didn't help that the MCU movies kinda screwed this show over a few times by having S.H.I.E.L.D. no longer exist due to the Winter Soldier movie, which made this show kinda have to adapt to something else. And then other things happened in the MCU movies too that caused the show to have to adapt again. This show also had the problem where they kept saying S.H.I.E.L.D. no longer existed, and all of a sudden the next season it did, and then there was a point where S.H.I.E.L.D. no longer existed again, and there was a thing again, then it wasn't. It got confusing after a while. Luckily, this show had good enough writers with compelling characters to overcome all of the challenges the movies caused this show and the confusing back and forth if they wanted S.H.I.E.L.D. to be back up and running again or not. After a while though, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. went beyond a show about agents. I felt like I was watching a show about a super family and their crazy adventures through space and time instead of a show about secret agents, and I felt like that actually worked for the series. Yes, I did mention time because this show did some time traveling. This series also introduced some magic in the MCU, Inhumans, and Ghost Rider, who was badass in this series. They also had this great storyline where they introduced the framework. Anything Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. did with the framework, which was essentially the Matrix, was some great television. Things got wild and all over the map, but I really enjoyed growing up with this show, and overall, it's a really good superhero TV series with some really good characters that you follow throughout this show. Coming in number 7. Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger takes place in the MCU, and it's the only freeform MCU TV series. Another show that I never hear anyone talk about, unfortunately. This is another teen drama TV series set in the MCU, but it's much darker than The Runaways, and it focuses more on serious issues. This series deals with a lot of real-life topics in a way that I feel works, and there was some great cinematography with some really artsy creative decisions too with its filmmaking, which I feel is not for everyone. In some ways, this show feels like the TV series Euphoria with the way they present things, but with a lower budget, and the leads are superheroes. Unfortunately, this series was a casualty of the MCU only wanting their shows to be on Disney Plus and Kevin Feige taking over the shows, so it only lasted 2 seasons, but I think this show is criminally underrated, and it had the potential to have more good seasons. Also, fun fact, this show did have a crossover with Runaways, which does make sense because they are both the same genre, and this show basically referenced every MCU project at the time. Like, there were references to the movies, the Netflix shows, and much more, which was kind of cool. Coming in number 6, Agent Carter. Agent Carter was a prequel series set in the MCU about the days of Peggy Carter's adventures set after Captain America: The First Avenger. This was a really fun show with an edge-of-your-seat plot, especially in the first season with likable characters. Like, I remember really liking the chemistry between Jarvis and Peggy in this series, and it was such a highlight when watching this show. The show lasted 2 seasons, and the first season was great, while the second season wasn't as great as the first season in my opinion, but still a top-notch season. Unfortunately, this series got cancelled on a cliffhanger of all things because of network changes and a bunch of problems with ABC. I think they also wanted to do a crossover with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter, which would have been amazing if Agent Carter never got cancelled. Either way, we got 2 really good seasons of this series, and I appreciate what we did get from this show. Coming in number 5. The Defenders. The Defenders was frickin' awesome. Only recently I learned this show was disliked by some fans, and the overall feelings for this show was very disappointing, which I never knew that so many people felt that way towards Defenders. I felt this show was the Avengers but for TV and much more serious. You had 4 really cool characters with great chemistry, plus it was satisfying to finally see them all team up after they all had their own shows. And there were sick fight scenes, amazing cinematography, like I love the way this show used color in their scenes, and an interesting story with Sigourney Weaver as the villain plus Elektra. I don't get what people do not like about this show. I mean, I did see some of the negative videos about this show, but I just disagree. This was the best team up in television ever. I really wish Kevin Feige didn't become in charge of the MCU shows, because I really was curious on what this show would have done for a season 2. Maybe Punisher would have made an appearance in season 2 as well, but I guess we will never know. This show should come back with its original cast. No need to recast anyone. I unfortunately think we will never get anything else with Defenders in the future, but never say never. If Daredevil Born Again is good, I would love to get a Defender Season 2. If Daredevil Born Again ruins Daredevil, then I definitely do not want Disney Plus to get their hands on Defenders. Overall, this was an amazing show. Coming in number 4. The Punisher. The Punisher was part of the Netflix side of the MCU, and it was a spin-off of Daredevil. I felt the first season was great, and the second season, while not being as great as the first, was still really good. Jon Bernthal gives such an excellent performance as the Punisher, and he does a great job showing many layers to this character instead of just being a vengeful psychopath like some people believe him to be. Also, the way this show portrays PTSD in many different lights was really unique for a superhero show. Obviously, you have Frank, who is trying to cope with what he did in Afghanistan and the death of his family, but you also have other characters dealing with PTSD in different ways as well. I feel like dealing with PTSD was something this show really tried to highlight, and it was all handled in a great way. This show kept me at the edge of my seat with brutal action, a story with many twists, while also having the series deal with real life issues, and there was great characters throughout this series. This show is how you do a series about an anti-hero right. Coming in number 3. Arrow. The only Arrowverse show on my list, and it's the one that started it all, plus it's the only Arrowverse show that I feel was mostly good to great all the way through. All of the Arrowverse shows started out either good or great, except for Batwoman, because that show started off bad. Unfortunately, as they all went along, they all turned for the worse. at some point throughout their shows. Arrow had that same problem where it kind of got bad for a while, but when Arrow did hit its low points and got bad for a little bit, I never felt it was anything that bad. Like, I think we can all agree, Arrow seasons 3 and 4 were the worst of that show. They bounced back in season 5, and man, season 5 was hitting on all cylinders. Arrow season 6 started off okay, but ended great. Arrow season 7 started off great, but then just ended okay. And Arrow season 8 was the best season of the show. Seasons 1, 2, 5, and 8 are some of my favorite seasons in all of superhero history. You also had the performance of Stephen Amell, who always gave it his all when portraying Oliver Queen. There's not a single episode where I felt like Stephen Amell was phoning anything in. Plus, he tried to make this show as best as he could behind the scenes too. After season 4 of Arrow, Stephen Amell basically apologized for disappointing fans, and he said moving forward they were going to try to get this show back on track, and boy, did they deliver. I look at the villains of this show, and this show had some great villains. The best villain was easily Deathstroke, which is probably one of my favorite live-action adaptations of a villain of all time. Manu Bennett gave such an amazing performance as Deathstroke, especially in season 2 of Arrow. Plus, he was given great writing and dialogue. I feel like most people stopped watching Arrow after season 4 and thought the rest of the show was bad, but it really improved after Arrow season 4, and this show is really good overall with some of the best superhero moments of all time. Coming in at number 2, Smallville. Smallville, a show that started out as Clark Kent learning about his powers and where he came from while being stuck in high school, and the drama that comes with being in high school, slowly turned into a Superman show that couldn't call himself Superman or fly, that introduced a ton of DC superheroes to this universe. Heck, we even got a prototype Justice League and the Justice Society in this series. Not only that, I do believe Smallville is the best versions of Superman and Lex Luthor we have ever seen in live action. Sorry, I mean Clark Kent, because he was definitely not acting like Superman and basically was Superman when he was going around calling himself the Blur. Anyways, I feel like this show is really consistent, especially a show with 10 seasons. I mean, this show kind of had some low points, like during the directionless era, like that's what I like to call it, which took place after high school and was before when he went to the Daily Planet and started calling himself the Blur. There was some kind of bad stuff going on, like I think the whole Lex and Lana relationship kind of was stupid, and it was kind of not that good. But that's like the only complaint I would have with this show. And also during like the directionless era, which by the way, for more context, that takes place in between seasons 5 and 7, which was only 3 seasons of the show. I wish they focused on Clark being in college along with his other friends being in college, but that's like the only thing I would change with the show. Everything else in Smallville was great, like seasons 1 through 4, the high school era, which I feel like is the best era of the show, was amazing and pretty much perfect. Then you have seasons 8 through 10, which was the Blur era, which was where he was essentially learning about how to become a hero and how to balance his 2 lives. And it's just an incredible journey watching this show from the beginning where Clark starts out to the end where he becomes Superman. It's an amazing 10-year journey, and I think it does a great job with showing the evolution of Clark and just showing the evolution of like almost every character. Like we get to see the downfall of Lex Luthor, a character who starts off as a friend of Clark, kind of a good guy. Then by season 7, he becomes his archenemy. And it's not like it happened overnight. It was like a slow evolution of Lex becoming a worse and worse person, and by the time he's in season 7, he's like, there's nothing redeemable about Lex Luthor. So not only is this a great show just to see the evolution of Clark becoming from this whiny kid and a freshman in high school to later, like 10 years later, becoming Superman, it's an evolution for so many different characters on the series. Also, speaking of like the aesthetics of this show, like I love the different tones this show has. It has like a combination of being really dark at times, being really lighthearted at times, being funny, being really sad, being really serious. And this show goes into many different tones, and I think it works for a Superman show, and it just works for a superhero show in general. You get a little bit of everything, and I think it really works for the series and benefits it. Then, like, just in general, the show, it changes. It goes from being, like, kind of a teen drama high school show to then being, like, a political drama, I guess. Like I said, during seasons 5 and 7, I feel like there was a bit of an identity crisis of what this show wanted to be. But even when this show was at its, like, directionless era, there were some really great moments. Like, you still got more character development with Clark, you got prototype Justice League, you introduced characters like Green Arrow, and you also get more of an evolution of Lex as a character into becoming the legendary villain he later becomes. But yeah, then they also did some like political stuff too, which was kind of strange but interesting. Like, you had some characters running for senator or politics and stuff like that. Then they showed like corruption. There's like possibly political corruption going on. But yeah, after you go through the directionless era, we get to the Blur era, which is seasons 8 through 10, which is essentially a Superman TV series without Clark calling himself Superman, and instead he was calling himself the Blur. And I really like the Blur era. I think it's great. It's the second best era of the show, but it's some really great superhero television. And yeah, this show really changes over time. I really like when movies and shows and franchises like go through different genres and different tones and changes and evolves over time. That's why I like the Harry Potter movies so much. Like, it changes over time. You kind of get that same feeling with Smallville too. But yeah, overall, Smallville is a great TV series, such a great experience. Seeing Clark Kent from the beginning to end, seeing all the characters where they start and seeing where they end up. It's just a great superhero show. And to me, it's the second best superhero show of all time, but it's not the best. So, coming in at number 1, Daredevil. I feel like most of us can agree Daredevil is the best superhero show of all time. Daredevil to me is the only superhero TV show that is a masterpiece from top to bottom. Amazing storytelling, check. Amazing characters, check. Amazing cinematography where each scene has something to say, check. Amazing action, check. There's so many checks that this show does. There's so much to break down that is great about Daredevil that I couldn't fit it all into this video. I could talk about Daredevil for hours and how incredible this series really is. I could go on as to why I believe this is the best superhero show of all time. This series is what I hope every superhero series strives to be like. Each season was better than the last, which I feel is very rare for a TV show. I couldn't even imagine what season 4 would have done to outdo season 3. Not only is this the best superhero show of all time, it's one of the best TV shows of all time too. No matter what happens with Daredevil in the future, like with him in his own Disney Plus show, I am happy we got a masterpiece of a superhero TV series with the 3 seasons we were gifted with. Okay, when putting this list together, I did not realize I was going to have so many MCU shows on my list, more specifically pre-Disney Plus MCU shows, but they really had something special with those shows, and it's a shame that that era of MCU TV is now gone. Instead, it has been replaced with mostly mid-Disney Plus MCU shows. I was expecting to put more DC shows on my list, but the problem is I feel unfortunately Arrow and Smallville are the only mostly consistent DC TV shows as of now. Because what ends up happening to most of the DC shows is they start out really good, then they regress to being bad over time. Maybe a lot of these TV shows on my list would have fallen off too if they had more seasons, but they didn't, so it is what it is. I really expected to have a tougher time making this list because there's so many superhero shows out there, but I really didn't have too much trouble. I hope in the future we get some more really good superhero TV shows.